This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth. We've got a big guest this week, State House Speaker Matt Hall, on the show. He sat down with me and Zach Gorchow to talk about his plans for the final 9 session days of the year in the legislature, his priorities on how to change economic development incentives, and even a little bit on the 2026 election. One of the Speaker's top priorities for the remainder of the year is greater transparency on legislative earmark, which are those funding items legislators for several years now have requested in the budget for their districts, like money for a new fire station or a group doing work they support. The big difference, as you'll hear in the interview, between the House and Senate is how far in advance earmark requests should be announced. The House had called for 60 days, the Senate 10 days. On Thursday, one day after our interview with Speaker Hall, the Senate passed a new version with 45 days of disclosure. So keep that in mind as you listen to the interview. With that, here's our chat with Speaker Hall.
Welcome back. I'm Zach Gorchow. Joining us now is the Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives, State Representative Matt Hall. Speaker Hall is a Republican from Richland Township in Kalamazoo County. Mr. Speaker, welcome to MichMash.
Well, thank you. You know, this is my debut.
It is.
We know, and we're very excited about it.
So, Speaker Hall, there's 9 session days remaining on the House's schedule this year. What would you and your caucus, the Republicans who control the House, like to get done before 2026?
Well, that's a great question. I'd say there's 3 things. One is we want HEAT, the Hall Ethics, Accountability, and Transparency Plan. I want to compliment Zach. A lot of the editors won't call it that, but Zach allows it. They don't want to give me the credit, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to stop the politicians from shoving in pork in the budget without anyone knowing what it is, who sponsored it, and what the public purpose is. And they've been doing this for years. And last year it was $1.3 billion of pork, and no one knows what it is. And you find out like a year later when Gongwer tells you. But what we wanted to do here is, why don't we disclose all this pork spending up front? Let's put a sponsor's name on it. Let's get public documents from a long time in advance that tell us what is the public purpose, what is the project, so we can look into these pork spending projects and say, which ones are good and which ones are bad. Now, we were successful in this last budget in cutting pork spending significantly, but when you're going back and forth and you're trying to understand what these things are. I'd sit in these meetings and Winnie Brinks, the Democrat Senate leader, would say, we want these 10 pork projects. And I would ask her, what is it? And I have to get back to you. I don't know what it is. It's hard to spend your tax dollars that way. You've seen people with criminal investigations based on these pork projects. So we need to get HEAT, real ethics, accountability, and transparency. The second thing is regulatory reform. When Governor Whitmer at the State of the State said she believes in regulatory and permitting reform, I stood up and clapped. I couldn't stand up fast enough. I said, wow, you opposed this for 6 years and now you support it. Wonderful. I told our rules chairman, Bill G. Schuette, I said, let's move really fast while Whitmer supports regulatory reform. So we looked at a report that Laura came up with. That's her Licensing and Regulatory Affairs Department. And they came up with a lot of ideas on how we can improve licensing in the state. The Rules Committee had some hearings. They talked to a lot of business groups, and we actually have over 50 bills that will improve regulations in Michigan and licensing in Michigan. So, we like to see a lot of that get done. And I think about 70% of what Whitmer's Laura department came up with, we agree with, and that's contained in those bills. So, that should be something that we could try to do. And then the third thing is economic development. We've succeeded in defunding a lot of the Whitmer economic development programs that aren't working. And now we're looking at, can we come together in a bipartisan way to come up with a solution that'll work better than some of the failed programs of the past.
So let's start with that economic development piece. Can you address what you would like to see in a new economic development tool? Of course, for the last few years, the state had used the SOAR system, Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve Fund, which was basically a bag of cash to convince a business to come here or to stay here. That is going away. What should this look like in terms of what the state does to try to bring in new business or keep existing business?
Well, this is something our representatives Mark Tisdale and Mike Hoadley have been working on for several months in the background, and they've come up with a lot of really good ideas. And what I would describe is, we want to see a neutral criteria that can be applied across the board to any employer that meets that criteria. As opposed to allowing Quentin Messer at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation to pick 4 or 5 companies and then shower them with cash. That's your tax dollars. That hasn't worked. So, I look at like the R&D tax credit we did last year. You come up with an amount of money, a pot. In that case, it was $100 million. There's criteria, and then everyone that meets that criteria will get a tax benefit, and it's capped at the 100 million. So in this case, you come up with a number. Let's say it's 100 million. You want to create jobs, and we want it to be higher paying jobs. Why would we pay for low paying jobs like they did with the Ford deal, where Whitmer paid billions of dollars for very low paying jobs. So we want jobs that are well above the average wage. And then you say, okay, if you create this number of jobs above the average wage, you'll get some kind of tax benefit from the state of Michigan after you perform. And that's the key. We want them to perform first and then get the benefit. One of the flaws in a lot of Whitmer's programs have been they make a commitment, then they get the cash, and then they don't perform. And when they don't perform, the only remedy we have is to try to get the money back from them. And that can be challenging after they've already spent it.
Are previous mechanisms like the transformational brownfield credit or the Higher Michigan concepts ideas that you would consider going forward, or are those sort of non-starters for you?
Yeah, we're not focused on transformational brownfields. I think the idea of, when we came out of the budget, we made a commitment to each other, myself and the governor and Winnie Brinks, although I've not seen her admit it publicly. We all made a commitment to each other that we were going to try to get an economic development solution before the end of the year. If you look at this budget, we defund SOAR, which is Whitmer's program to hand out billions of dollars of cash to the corporations. We defund it. Then we cut the business attraction funds in half. So we've defunded some of the parts of MEDC with the idea of now we're going to create programs that actually work. So in order to do that, I think we have to try to keep it simple, and we can't bring too many issues forward, and that's why transformational brownfield is on the back burner right now. It's really looking at, how are we going to replace SOAR and MEGA? My goal is to repeal SOAR and MEGA, and I think we'll be able to do that. But we're going to have to come up with something to replace it, and that's what the conversation is about right now.
We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we will have more from Speaker Matt Hall. Welcome back to MichMash, and here we are again with Speaker Matt Hall.
So let's talk about the earmarks and the HEAT plan you were referencing earlier. So it doesn't seem like the House and Senate, which have both passed packages, are that far apart. It seems like the biggest issue is how much advance notice there should be. The House recently moved a little closer to where the Senate's at, went from 90 days to 60, if I remember right, but the Senate's still at something like 10 days. What is it going to take to get this done? I mean, it always feels like find a number in the middle. The House has moved a little bit toward the middle. The Senate hasn't yet.
Yeah, well, when we started, the Democrats in the Senate, and they're led by the ultimate Lansing insider, Sarah Anthony. And sometimes we got to pull Sarah out of Lansing and say, look, there are other people in the state of Michigan, and they don't believe in this system of just getting all this money for the lobbyists from the taxpayers and just spending it on all kinds of wasteful projects. We see them all over Lansing. I mean, you look, they have that new pool they paid for, millions of dollars for that pool, the Hip-Hop Academy, all kinds of things, all kinds of buildings all over Lansing. It's good for Lansing and the lobbyists, but not good for the taxpayers. So we look at this, and the conversation from Sarah Anthony and Brinks was, what are you talking about? We are very transparent. We'll just disclose it after the governor signs the bill. It's like, okay, well, after the governor signs the bill, what does that do? That doesn't help us or know what we're voting on and to stop things that are bad. Then it was 2 days. Well, 2 days. Well, what is that going to do? Now they're really dug in on 10 days. And I would just say, if you have a pork project and you only have to disclose it 10 days before the vote, often the deal is made several days before the vote. And I've sat in these meetings, and I'm just going to say, like, when you're trying to spend tax dollars wisely, you want to know what these things are, and you want an opportunity to vet them and understand them and to measure them against each other. And 10 days won't accomplish that. It's really laughable. We did offer 60 days. I think it's way too few days. I really see this as a benefit for all of us because, the more time we have to vet these projects and to understand what they are and to put them out there for the public to scrutinize, the fewer mistakes we're going to make. So I think we all benefit from a lot of time. We offered 60. My hope is that the Democrats agree to 60 and they do it this week. But my experience, we went through the budget and we got a budget done, by the way, and we did it bipartisan, something that the federal government really struggled to do. But we compromised and we got it done in Michigan. And because of that, we have a lot of important government services to help people with during this time. But as I'm going through that, I look and I said, there's so much wasteful pork spending in here. We cut it 87%, which I was really proud of doing that. And I thought we came up with a pretty good product. But when we were in there, the Democrats, the thing they cared about the most, the number one value they brought to the conversation was, we want our pork. And they hate HEAT. They hate all of it. They hate Hall. They hate ethics. They hate accountability. They hate transparency. They hate all four parts of HEAT. They wanted the pork so bad. They're so addicted to the pork. They made a signed deal that they were going to do HEAT in exchange for the pork. They were going to agree to the transparency in exchange for the pork. And I've been dragging them across to make this commitment, to follow through on the commitment. It's always easy to make the commitment, but then when you have to perform, they drag their feet. But we are not going to pass a single one of their Senate Democrat bills until they honor the commitments from the budget. That's just how it's going to go. And so it will get done. It will be it'll either be 60 days or very close to it, because we're going to enforce this through not running their bills. That's what we have to do. And I'll just say, people talk about other things. They weren't in the room negotiating for other things. They were in the room trying to get pork. And what did I care about? The transparency. But the taxpayers are going to benefit once the deal's done.
You recently announced we're not doing FOIA, referring to a push to expand the state's Freedom of Information laws. Why not? I know there's not a whole lot of time left in the year, but why not focus on FOIA?
Well, and that's what I'm talking about is, if the Democrats really cared about FOIA, they would have negotiated it in the budget. They didn't. They didn't say we want FOIA. They said we want pork. We want all kinds of pork spending. I said, okay, you want the pork spending. There's not one pork project I want in this budget. So I'm going to trade it for true ethics, accountability, and transparency through the disclosure of the pork spending. I mean, you look at this, there are people with criminal investigations going on. There's all kinds of wasteful spending. I mean, they have that distillery, that for-profit distillery up on, South Manitou Island. Still nobody will tell us who did it. We're going to ban all the for-profit corporations from getting these pork projects. And I think we're really going to be in a position where we're going to make much better decisions on the spending. And when you have to disclose, we're not going to get a lot of these shady ones. I mean, you saw this one of the Democrats did a couple years ago where they gave a bunch of money to a developer. He tried to kick everybody out of the trailer park. The township didn't want it. And then there are all kinds of problems coming from this. And you say, why didn't anyone check with the township to say, do you even want this development? Do you want to displace all these people from their homes? You know, that's what disclosure is going to bring. I think it's so much more significant than the FOIA. And that's why that's what I've championed. And, you know, you can really tell the politicians are going to say a lot of things to you guys, but you can see from this budget deal what everyone truly cared about.
Couldn't these two things go hand in hand, though? I mean, you've put a lot of emphasis on oversight. This is definitely, I think, the most active oversight we've seen from a legislative chamber in the time I've been covering the Capitol. But there hasn't really been an ability to fully vet what happened with some of these grants you've mentioned that have questionable histories because the legislature and the governor's office are exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. But if they were subject to it, some of the communications that went on would become public. Couldn't you do both? More transparency on the earmarks, but then also have Michigan no longer be one of two states in the union that its legislature and executive office are exempt from FOIA.
Well, yeah, and you see, you know, like Whitmer, right? Whitmer said, I don't care if the legislature won't act. I will just subject myself to FOIA when I become governor. And as you know, a lot of the press, they don't talk about that. They don't say anything about how Whitmer just doesn't comply with that. Whitmer got in and said, we're going to keep we're not going to do any of this. We're just going to not do FOIA. So, you know, I think people could also point that out. For me, I mean, you know, they talk about this every year. All the politicians say they support it, and then it never happens. So what I've done differently is I've just said, look, guys, this is not going to happen. So let's redirect to real transparency, ethics, and accountability. And we're actually getting some of that done with H.E.A.T becoming law very soon on the pork disclosure. And then some of the other elements that we're working on, like stopping the politicians from becoming lobbyists as soon as they leave office. I will tell you, I remember lame duck last year. I actually had to worry which one of these people have deals that we don't know about to become lobbyists as soon as they leave office. And can I trust these guys to stick with me through this process? You know, I'm not getting as much traction on that because all these senators think that they're term limited and they're going to become lobbyists. I told them, I said, you guys don't have the skills to be lobbyists. None of you are going to be lobbyists. So just give it up and let's do the right thing and let's ban the politicians from becoming lobbyists. And we want to ban the politicians that are currently politicians from being lobbyists too, because we actually have to do that because politicians thought, you know what, I could be a lobbyist in another state and then I can lobby and I don't have a conflict. Well, if you're working for them in another state, you have a conflict. But we actually have to ban that in Michigan too, where they can't become lobbyists in other states. And remember, Democrat Rebecca Warren did that. She was a lobbyist in other states, but voted on it in Michigan and had no conflict of interest. So there's a lot of things that need to be done, and I'm focusing on the ones that I think are most meaningful. But I'll tell you, when you get behind closed doors and you actually are dealing with these things, It's much different than it is in the press, where they all say they support it. I'm actually the politician, and I'm not a politician. I'm an outsider dealing with a bunch of politicians. I'm the one that's actually driving transparency. And I think the press should be a lot more on my side, because they like to lobby for these things. They should be championing HEAT, and they should be like, wow, there's actually a leader that's forcing them to do this, because it's a lot harder than you guys think it is.
Let's talk about sort of like a broad view of the bills that have been going through the legislature. So of the 249 bills the House has passed this year, just 21 have passed the Senate. And of the 197 bills the Senate has passed this year, just 11 have passed the House. Neither chamber is even giving a committee hearing to most of the others' bills. Of course, there are many bills the two chambers philosophically will never agree on. But can you address the sort of frustration among advocates for this legislation at the inaction on bills that have sort of broad support?
Yeah, well, I think, you look at like Winnie Brinks. I mean, she became leader and wants to do all these very small things. I didn't become speaker to do all of these very small things. I came in to do, and I said this, like the reason the Democrats lost the House, there were a lot of reasons, but one reason is, they played it very safe. I mean, you look at Joe Tate when he was a Democrat speaker, they didn't take on any of the big issues. I came in and said, look, we're gonna take risks. We're gonna govern aggressively. We're gonna make deals. And I'll look at, when we did the walk-off last year, the reason we did the walk-off and brought the Democrat trifecta to an end was because we were trying to accomplish three things. We were trying to accomplish the tip credit. We were trying to save our tipped workers. We were trying to address the sick leave so that there was paid sick leave for Michigan workers, but that they came back to a job with that paid sick leave. And then we were trying to fix our local roads. Well, here we are in November. All three of those things have happened. Okay. So, and now I came out this year and said we were going to do HEAT, which nobody thought we could get done. We're doing it. So I'm looking at this and saying, this is going excellent. I mean, every one of our big goals we're checking off, and we're addressing issues that have not been addressed before. I mean, Whitmer has been governor for 7 years, and she came out and said, this is the only leader that has the guts and the brains to put forward a roads plan and actually pass it through the chamber. And it became law. Her and I together willed that into law by forcing the Democrats using the budget to come in line and do a local roads plan. The tip credit was huge. We saved the restaurant industry. You look at what we did with paid sick leave. We actually found a bipartisan compromise that actually is going to protect sick leave in Michigan, but also make it work for employers. So I'm looking at this stuff and saying, we're accomplishing really big things. And I would take these really big things over all of the very small minor things that Winnie Brinks is focused on. Now we're taking on economic development. That's a big one. And if we can see that through, I would say, look, you really have to make an argument. We've tackled a lot of really difficult issues, and we're making big moves. We're just not doing a lot of the really small stuff that Brinks is focused on.
So I think, Mr. Speaker, I think that put this into, really sharp relief, as I think a lot of groups around town, the Lansing insiders, whatever, they are frustrated. They feel like these small things you're talking about are bottled up. They're not moving. One example, there's this 4-bill package that the Senate passed 37-0 in May. It moved up the term of office start date for city, township, village officers from November 20 to December 1. Why? Because we have this new provision in the Constitution that says military overseas absentee ballots can be counted for 6 days after the election, but a lot of charters say these folks start their terms the Monday after the election. Seems pretty innocuous. The House, in fact, introduced its own bills a few weeks later, passed its own bills in September. Yet, despite unanimously passing both chambers at least 2 months ago, still nothing. Can you address things like that? These are sort of the housekeeping, nonpartisan kinds of things that seem to many people's eyes, to be bottled up for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, and I know that Brinks cares a lot about these very small things. And Anthony does too. You know, she's the ultimate Lansing insider. So all the lobbyists keep coming to her. And I would just say, if you guys care so much about these very small things, we're sending them over to you. Just pass them. Just pass the House bills. You know, I get blamed for this, but it's like, if I'm moving the bills over to the Senate and they care so much, they can just pass the House bills. I mean, why are they so focused on who gets the credit? But, you know, I mean, with what we saw from them with the budget and their unwillingness to do a deal, now we got a deal done. And one thing we haven't talked about is the great relationship that I've forged with Governor Whitmer and how that's really driven this year. I think it's been really successful. But, you know, I mean, these are not an easy group of people to deal with, Brinks and the Democrats. I mean, look at, once they got past repealing everything that Snyder did, and it came to actually governing last year, they really struggled with all Democrats. And now you say, why is it that it seems like the governor and I are more aligned at times than them? I mean, what has pushed that to where the governor has come more my way? And I would say it's the lack of leadership and the lack of vision on the big things from these Democrats in the Senate. And they're very difficult to work with. So, you know, I mean, once we get HEAT done, there's an opening that there could be some of these very small things. But my goal for the year is to do economic development and regulatory reform and try to finish strong on some of the big things.
Let's switch gears a little bit from governing to the 2026 election. How do you size up? How do you size up the Republican field for governor?
Well, it's a very strong field. You've got a lot of great candidates. You know, John James is doing very well. Eric Nesbitt, you know, and he has a lot of experience as a legislator. You know, Mike Cox has won statewide in very tough races before. So we've got some very strong candidates, and I think we're going to do well. I mean, you have Mike Duggan running. Mike Duggan and I get along very well. I've done many deals with him. The Public Safety Trust Fund, you know, we did things for Detroit that could not be done in the Democrat trifecta. I did more for Detroit as Speaker than Joe Tate did. And a lot of that is through working with Mayor Duggan. We have a great relationship. But he's more of a Democrat than a Republican. And I think you're seeing that fight in the Democrat Party, similar to what you're seeing between Brinks and Whitmer, where you have a radical left and the more moderate Democrat that wants to work with Trump. You're seeing that play out a little bit with Duggan and Benson. And so I think they'll splinter the Democrats and the Republicans.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk with us on MichMash.
Oh, thank you, Zach. It's great to be with you.